6 months had passed since the cave, and Taeyang had learned to hide his changes and to act normal even though nothing about him was normal anymore. And he had returned to work at the university and tried to continue his research. But it was difficult to focus on ancient pottery when he could hear radio waves and see ultraviolet light and sense the electrical impulses in people's brains. And Hana knew something was wrong, and she asked him every day if he was okay, and he always said yes. But she did not believe him, and he could tell from the way she looked at him with concern and worry, and he wanted to tell her the truth. But he did not know how, and he did not want to scare her or make her think he was insane. And so he kept his secrets and tried to live a normal life even though normal was now impossible. And then came the day everything changed, and he was in the laboratory with his colleague Jiwon, who was a young engineer working on a device to analyze mineral compositions, and the device was experimental and somewhat unstable. And Taeyang had warned her about the power fluctuations, but she had insisted it was safe. And then something went wrong, and the machine started to overheat, and Taeyang could feel it before. The alarms went off, and he could sense the electrical surge building inside the device like a wave about to crash. And he shouted for Jiwon to run, but she did not understand, and she moved toward the machine to shut it down manually. And Taeyang knew she would not make it in time, and he knew the machine would explode and the wall behind it would collapse and she would die. And he did not think. And he just moved, and time seemed to slow down around him, and he ran faster than any human should be able to run, and his body began to shimmer and then became translucent like glass. And he passed through the collapsing wall like it was made of water and grabbed Jiwon and pulled her back, and they tumbled to the floor as the machine exploded behind them, and debris filled the air. And when the dust settled, Jiwon was staring at him with wide eyes and trembling. And she asked what he was and how he had done that. And Taeyang looked down at his hands, and they were solid again. But he could still feel the power humming under his skin. And he knew there was no point in lying anymore, and he knew everything was about to change. And other people had seen it too, and security cameras had recorded it. And within an hour the university was locked down, and men in suits arrived, and they were from the government, and they took Taeyang to a facility outside the city, and they asked him questions and ran tests and treated him like he was dangerous, and maybe he was, and Agent Seokjin was assigned to watch him, and Seokjin was a serious man with sharp eyes. And he did not smile much, but he was not cruel. And over the weeks they talked, and Taeyang told him everything about the cave and the water and the voice and the changes, and Seokjin listened and did not judge, and eventually he said he believed Taeyang, and that he did not think Taeyang wanted to hurt anyone. And Taeyang was grateful for that, and the scientists at the facility tried to understand what had happened to him, and they took more blood samples and did more scans, and they found that his cells were changing constantly and adapting and evolving, and they said he was becoming something beyond human. And they did not know if that was good or bad, and Taeyang did not know either. And then one night as he lay in his cell, because that was what it really was, even though they called it a room, he felt something, and it was a presence, and it was vast and cold and coming closer. And he sat up and looked out the small window, and the sky was dark and full of stars, and then the stars began to disappear. And at first he thought it was clouds, but clouds did not move like that, and clouds did not block out light in perfect geometric patterns. And he realized what he was seeing, and his blood turned to ice, and he shouted for Seokjin. And when the agent came running, Taeyang pointed at the sky and said they were here. And Seokjin looked, and his face went pale, and he grabbed his radio and started making calls, and within minutes alarms were going off everywhere, and people were running and trying to figure out what was happening. And the ships appeared then, and they materialized in orbit without warning, and they were massive and dark and shaped like nothing humans had ever built. And there were dozens of them, and they hung in the sky like black stars, and every telescope and every satellite and every radar system on Earth suddenly detected them at once, and the world went into panic, and governments scrambled to respond, and the military mobilized, and everyone asked the same question, which was, what do they want? And the answer came quickly, and it came in every language simultaneously, and it was broadcast on every frequency and every screen and every device on Earth. And the message was simple and terrifying, and it said humanity had been evaluated and found wanting, and Earth would be harvested for its resources, and evacuation was not an option, and resistance was futile, and the ships would begin their work in 7 days, and humanity should prepare for the end. And the broadcast ended, and the world fell into chaos, And Taiyang stood at his window and watched the ships, and he understood now, and he understood why. He had been changed, and why the voice had spoken to him, and why his life was no longer his own. And the ancient race that had left the pool in the cave had known this would happen, and they had left their gift on worlds across the galaxy. And they had given species a chance and a weapon, and he was that weapon, and he was humanity's only hope. And the voice spoke to him then clearer than ever, and it said, "Now you understand, and now you must act, and you must become what you were meant to be, and you must show them that humanity is not weak and not willing to die quietly." And Taiyang felt the power surge inside him, and felt his body change and adapt, and he knew what he had to do. And he turned to Seokjin and said he needed to get out. And Seokjin looked at him and then looked at the ships in the sky, and he nodded and said he would help. And that night they escaped from the facility, and it was easy, because Taeyang could sense the guards and could move through walls and could disable electronics with a thought. And they made it to the surface and looked up at the alien ships, and Taeyang said he needed to learn more, and needed to understand his abilities, and needed to become stronger. And Seokjin said he knew people who could help, and people who would listen and who would believe. And over the next week, as the world fell apart around them, and as governments tried and failed to negotiate with the aliens, and as people rioted and prayed and prepared for death, Taeyang trained and pushed his body to its limits and discovered he could do things he had never imagined. And he could fly, and he could generate energy, and he could see across vast distances and could hear whispers from space, and the voice guided him and taught him and showed him how to fight. And on the 7th day, when the alien ships began to descend and began to deploy their harvesting machines, Taeyang rose into the sky, and he glowed with blue light, and his body crackled with power. And he met the first wave of alien drones, and he destroyed them. And the aliens had not expected resistance, and they had not expected someone like him. And they pulled back to reassess, and humanity watched and hoped. And Taeyang knew this was just the beginning, and knew the real war was about to start, and he knew he would need help and would need others like him. And the voice told him how, and told him the transformation could be shared and could be replicated, and Taeyang landed and found Seokjin and told him they needed volunteers. The world had changed in ways no one could have predicted, and cities that had once been centers of human civilization were now battlegrounds, and the alien machines harvested everything they touched and stripped the land of resources and left nothing but ash and dust, and humanity fought back with everything they had, and missiles and bombs and bullets. But nothing worked against the alien shields, and their technology was so far beyond human understanding that it seemed like magic, and people died by the thousands and then by the millions, and governments collapsed and society crumbled. And it looked like the end was truly coming. And then Taeyang appeared, and he flew through the sky like a comet, and he tore through alien machines with his bare hands, and he saved cities and rescued thousands and gave humanity hope. And the news spread quickly, and people called him a hero and a savior, and some called him an angel, and others called him a weapon, and he was all of these things, and none of them. And he was just a man who had drunk from a pool and had his life stolen from him, and had decided that if he could not have his own life, then he would use it to save others. And the aliens noticed him, and they sent stronger forces and deadlier machines, and Taeyang fought them all and won some battles and lost others, and learned more about his abilities with each fight. And he discovered he could absorb energy and redirect it, and could heal from injuries that should have killed him, and could adapt to new threats almost instantly. And the voice in his head continued to guide him and teach him, and it told him this was what the ancient race had intended, and they had known that species would need champions, and would need those willing to sacrifice everything. And Taeyang wondered sometimes what had happened to that ancient race, and why they were gone. And the voice never answered those questions, and scientist Yunji had been working in a government laboratory when Taeyang contacted her, and she was brilliant and had been studying his blood samples from months ago, and she had made a breakthrough and discovered that the changes in his DNA could be replicated, and the process was dangerous and unstable, and would likely kill most people who tried it. But it was possible, and Taeyang met with her in a bunker deep underground, while alien ships patrolled the skies above, and she showed him her research and explained that volunteers would need to be strong and healthy and willing to risk death, and even if they survived the transformation, they might not gain the same abilities he had, and might become something different and something unpredictable. And Taeyang understood the risks, but he also understood that he could not fight this war alone, and humanity needed more champions and needed an army of enhanced warriors who could stand against the alien threat. And so they put out a call for volunteers, and thousands responded, and people from every nation and every background. And they came knowing they might die, and came anyway, because they wanted to fight and wanted to protect their families and their world. And the first group of volunteers included Daiho, who was a fighter pilot and had lost his entire squadron to an alien attack, and who volunteered because he had nothing left to lose and wanted revenge. And there was Somin, who was an engineer and who had designed weapon systems and who believed she could be more useful, with enhanced abilities than behind a desk, and there were dozens of others, and they all knew the risks and they all chose to proceed. And the transformation process was brutal, and Yunji had synthesized a serum from Taeyang's blood, and the volunteers were injected with it, and then they waited, and some died within minutes, and their bodies rejected the changes, and they convulsed and screamed, and there was nothing anyone could do, and others survived but went mad and had to be restrained and sedated. And Taeyang watched and felt the weight of their deaths and their suffering, and wondered if he had made the right choice. And then Daiho opened his eyes, and they glowed with silver light, and he sat up and flexed his hands, and power crackled around him. And he smiled and said he felt amazing, and Somin woke next, and her transformation was different, and she could interface with machines, and could control technology with her thoughts, and could see electronic signals like colors in the air, and more volunteers survived, and each was different, and each had unique abilities, and together they became humanity's first enhanced team, and they trained together and learned to work together, and Taeyang taught them everything the voice had taught him, and they became a weapon, and they struck at alien forces with devastating effectiveness. And the aliens had never encountered resistance like this, and their careful plans began to fall apart, and humanity began to win battles and began to push back, and hope spread like wildfire, and people who had given up began to fight again. And more volunteers came forward, and more survived the transformation, and the enhanced warriors grew in number, and they coordinated with human militaries, and shared intelligence and developed new tactics, and Taeyang realized that humanity's greatest strength was not individual power, but the ability to work together and to adapt and to never give up. And the aliens began to change their strategy, and they brought in their veteran forces and their elite units and beings that had conquered 100 worlds. And these aliens were not machines, but living creatures. And they were massive and powerful and ancient, and they had fought wars across the galaxy for thousands of years, and they looked at humanity with contempt and saw them as insects to be crushed. And the first major battle happened over the ruins of what had once been Tokyo, and the alien warriors descended in dropships, and they wore armor that shimmered with energy and carried weapons that could level buildings, and Taeyang led his enhanced team against them. And the battle was fierce and brutal, and the ground shook with the impact of their clashes, and Daiho fought with silver fire and moved like lightning. And Somin had built herself a suit of powered armor that she controlled with her mind, and it bristled with weapons, and others fought with their own unique abilities. And the alien warriors were strong and skilled, but they had not expected this level of resistance, and they had not expected humans to be so fierce and so determined. And the battle raged for hours, and both sides took heavy casualties, and in the end, the humans won and drove the aliens back, and the victory was costly. But it proved that the aliens could be beaten, and it proved that humanity would not go quietly into extinction. And Taeyang stood among the ruins and looked at his team and saw the exhaustion in their eyes and the wounds on their bodies, and he knew this war was far from over, and knew the aliens would escalate and would bring even greater forces, and he knew that strength alone would not be enough, and he needed to find another way, and needed to understand the aliens better, and needed to know why they were doing this. And that night, as he meditated and listened to the voice, it told him something new, and told him about the true nature of the aliens, and told him they were called the Gathering, and they were not conquerors by choice but by necessity, and their own world had been destroyed long ago in a war with the ancient race that had created the pools, and the Gathering had been wandering the galaxy ever since and harvesting other worlds to sustain themselves and to keep their civilization alive, and they were not evil but desperate. And Taeyang realized then that this war could not be won through violence alone, and realized there had to be another way and a better way, and he began to form a plan that would either save both species or doom them all. 18 months had passed since the first ships appeared, and Earth was scarred and broken. But humanity still fought and still survived, and Taeyang had spent those months learning everything he could about the Gathering and about the ancient war that had destroyed their world, and the voice in his head had given him access to memories that were not his own, and memories that belonged to beings who had died millions of years ago. And he had seen the war through their eyes and had seen the Gathering's homeworld burn and had seen their desperation and their pain. And he understood now that they were not monsters but victims, and they had been doing what they needed to do to survive. And humanity was just the latest in a long line of species they had harvested and would not be the last unless something changed. And Taeyang knew he had to try something different and had to take a risk that might get him killed and might doom humanity, but might also save everyone. And he gathered his team and told them his plan, and Hana was there too, and she had become a strategic coordinator and had helped plan many of their victories. And when he told them he wanted to go to the Gathering's command ship and talk instead of fight, they thought he was insane, and Daeho said they should just keep killing the aliens until the aliens gave up and left, and Soman said that could take decades and they were already exhausted and running out of enhanced warriors because not enough volunteers survived the transformation. And Hana looked at Taeyang and asked if he really thought they would listen, and he said he did not know, but he had to try. And she nodded and said she would come with him. And Daeho cursed and said if they were going to do something stupid, then he was coming too, and Soman agreed and others volunteered, and they formed a strike team and they planned carefully and studied the Gathering's ship movements and found a pattern and waited for their chance, and when it came they moved fast, and Taeyang flew through space and carried his team in a shield of energy. And they approached the massive command vessel, and it was the size of a city and bristled with weapons and defenses, and they should have been destroyed instantly. But Taeyang broadcast a message on all frequencies and said he wanted to talk and wanted to meet with their leader. And for a long moment, nothing happened. And then a bay door opened, and they were allowed inside, and the interior of the ship was like nothing they had ever seen. And it was vast and organic and beautiful and alien. And they were met by guards who were 3 meters tall and covered in armor that seemed to be part of their bodies. And the guards escorted them through corridors that curved and twisted, and finally they came to a chamber, and inside was the eldest, and its name was Vorath. And it was ancient and massive, and its form was hard to describe because it seemed to shift and change, and it looked at them with eyes that had seen 1,000 worlds die, and it spoke in a voice that resonated in their minds, and it asked why they had come. And Taeyang stepped forward and said he came to offer an alternative. And Vorath asked, what alternative could a primitive species offer? And Taeyang said he carried the memories and knowledge of the precursors and the ancient race that had destroyed Vorath's world, and Vorath's form rippled with anger. And it said the precursors had been destroyers and had shown no mercy and had left the Gathering homeless and broken, and Taeyang agreed and said the precursors had been wrong and had been cruel, but they had also left behind gifts and had left repositories of knowledge and technology hidden across the galaxy, and technology that could restore dead worlds and could give the Gathering a new home and could end their need to harvest. And Vorath was silent, and the air in the chamber grew heavy and tense. And finally Vorath asked why they should believe him. And Taeyang opened his mind and shared the memories and shared the locations of the hidden repositories and shared everything the voice had taught him. And Vorath saw the truth of it and saw that this human was offering them salvation and offering them a chance to stop the endless cycle of conquest and destruction. And Vorath asked what Taeyang wanted in return. And Taeyang said he wanted peace and wanted both species to survive and wanted to work together instead of fighting. And Vorath said the Gathering had conquered 1,000 worlds and had never accepted help from a lesser species and had never trusted anyone. And Taeyang said then it was time to start and time to try something new. And Vorath looked at the other humans and saw their determination and their hope and saw that they truly believed in this possibility. And Vorath made a decision that shocked every member of the Gathering and said they would accept and would trust and would try this new path. And the war ended not with fire but with words and with hope. And the Gathering ship stopped harvesting and started helping. And they shared their technology and their knowledge, and humanity shared what they had learned from the precursors, and together they began to search for the hidden repositories, and they found the first one on a dead moon at the edge of the solar system. and inside were machines that could terraform planets, and could restore atmospheres, and could bring life back to dead worlds, and the gathering wept when they saw it, and wept for all the species they had destroyed and all the centuries they had spent in darkness, and they began the long process of rebuilding and of healing, and Taiyang watched as former enemies worked together and as gathering engineers taught human scientists and as humans showed the gathering what it meant to hope and to dream. And Hana stood beside him one day on the observation deck of a joint human and gathering station, and they watched ships from both species working together in orbit, and she asked him if he ever regretted drinking from the pool, and he thought about it, and thought about all he had lost, and all he had gained, and he said no, and said he would do it again, and she smiled and squeezed his hand and said she was proud of him, and the voice spoke one last time, and it said his task was complete, and said he had done what the precursors had hoped someone would do, and had broken the cycle of violence and had brought peace instead of war, and had shown that different species could work together and could build something better. And the voice said it would leave him now, and would let him rest. And Taiyang felt it fade from his mind, and felt a weight lift from his shoulders, and he was alone in his own head for the first time in 2 years, and it felt strange and quiet and peaceful, and he looked at Hana and said, his life was finally his own again. And she laughed and said, no, it was not, and said he was humanity's hero and the gathering savior, and he would never have a normal life and would always belong to something greater than himself. And he realized she was right, and realized that his life would never truly be his own, but that was okay because he had used it to save billions and had given both species a future, and had proven that sacrifice and hope were more powerful than weapons and violence. And he smiled and watched the ships work and felt content and felt like maybe he had found his purpose and maybe the voice had been right all along and maybe losing his life had been worth it, because he had gained something better, and he had become a bridge between worlds and a symbol of what humanity could achieve when they refused to give up and refused to accept defeat. And the stars shined above them, and the future stretched out bright and full of possibility, and Taiyang knew that whatever came next he would face it not as a weapon or a tool, but as a man who had chosen to give everything for others, and who had found meaning in that sacrifice. And Hana leaned against him, and they stood together in silence, and watched the dawn of a new age, and watched two species learning to trust, and to build and to hope, and it was beautiful and it was worth everything. The transport shuttle descended through layers of purple clouds before breaking into clear air above an endless ocean. Hyunwoo pressed his face against the window and watched the water stretch to every horizon. Somewhere beneath those waves sat the galaxy's most famous xenobiology academy, and somehow he had earned a place there. The other two humans sat across from him in the cramped shuttle. Jisoo kept bouncing in her seat and pointing at every new thing she spotted through the windows. Taemin looked calm, but his hands gripped the armrest tight enough to turn his knuckles white. They had left Earth 3 weeks ago and traveled through 2 jump gates to reach this water world called Thalas Prime. The shuttle pilot was a Thalesian, one of the aquatic species that built their civilization in the deep oceans of their homeworld. She had gray skin that looked smooth like a dolphin and large black eyes that never seemed to blink. When she spoke through the translation device mounted on the shuttle wall, her voice sounded like singing mixed with clicking sounds. She told them they would dock at the surface platform in 5 minutes and that someone would meet them there. Hyunwoo had studied everything he could find about Thalas Prime. Before leaving Earth, the Academy floated on massive platforms connected by underwater tubes and tunnels. Most of the actual learning spaces existed below the surface where the Thalesians felt most comfortable. The humans would live in the surface dormitories with other air-breathing species because the underwater sections would require breathing apparatus at all times. What really interested Hyunwoo was the Apex containment wing. The Academy kept specimens of the most dangerous predators discovered across the galaxy. They studied these creatures to understand death world ecosystems and predator behavior. Earth had been classified as a death world when humanity joined the Galactic Council 30 years ago, though most alien species considered it a mild one. Real death worlds like Krill or Vortan made Earth look safe as a playground. The shuttle touched down with barely a bump. The pilot opened the rear hatch and gestured for them to exit. Hyunwoo grabbed his single bag of belongings and followed Jisoo and Taemin onto the platform. The air smelled like salt and something else he could not identify. Wind whipped across the open platform hard enough to make him stagger sideways. A figure waited near the platform edge. Hyunwoo recognized the species from his research as a Thalissian, but this one wore a dark robe that covered most of his body. He was tall and thin with the same gray skin and black eyes as their pilot. When he spoke, his voice came through a small translation device clipped to his robe collar. "Welcome to Thalas Academy. I am Professor Velnath, and I will be your instructor for advanced predator studies. You three are the first humans to study in this program. So many eyes will watch your progress with great interest." Professor Velnath did not smile or offer any gesture of warmth. He simply turned and began walking toward a large doorway set into the platform floor. The humans exchanged glances and then hurried to follow him. The doorway led to a ramp that curved down and down until they walked underwater. Thick, transparent walls showed the ocean surrounding them on all sides. Strange fish with too many fins swam past and stared at them with eyes that glowed in the dim light. The professor led them through a maze of tunnels until they reached a large circular chamber. Other students were already gathered there in small groups. Hyunwoo counted at least 15 different species. Some looked almost human with 2 arms and 2 legs. Others had multiple limbs or bodies that seemed to shift and change shape. A few floated in the air without any visible means of support. When the 3 humans entered the chamber, most conversations stopped. Every eye turned toward them. Hyunwoo felt his face grow hot under all that attention. Jisoo waved cheerfully at the nearest group while Taemin stood very still with his arms crossed. Professor Velnath addressed the entire gathering. "These are our human exchange students. They come from Earth, which some of you may know was classified as a Class 4 death world upon contact. Humans evolved as persistence hunters and social pack animals. Their world lacks extreme dangers found on higher classification death worlds, but they demonstrate surprising resilience and adaptability." One of the alien students spoke up in a buzzing voice. "Are humans actually dangerous, or do they just come from a dangerous world? I heard they have no natural weapons and their physical strength ranks below average." The professor gestured at the humans. "Perhaps one of you would like to answer that question." Taemin stepped forward before Hyunwoo or Jisoo could react. "You are correct that we have no claws or venom or thick armor. What we have is endurance and intelligence. Our ancestors hunted animals much larger and stronger by simply following them until they collapsed from exhaustion. We learned to understand predator behavior because we had to compete with them for food and territory. Physical strength is not the only kind of strength that matters." Several alien students made sounds that might have been laughter or agreement or mockery. Hyunwoo could not tell which. The professor nodded slowly and then continued with his orientation speech. He explained the schedule and the rules and the various facilities they would use during their studies. Finally, he led them to the Apex Containment Wing. This section of the academy sat even deeper, underwater in a separate structure connected by a single, heavily guarded tunnel. Security checkpoints scanned each student before allowing them to pass. The walls here were thicker and covered with warning symbols that Hyunwoo recognized from universal safety standards. They emerged into an observation deck that overlooked a massive circular enclosure. The space was large enough to hold a building. Most of it lay empty except for a few artificial rock formations and a small pool of water. At first, Hyunwoo thought the enclosure stood vacant. Then something moved in the shadows near the far wall. The creature that emerged stood 12 feet tall on 4 legs thick as tree trunks. Black scales covered its entire body and reflected the overhead lights with an oily sheen. 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows glowed with amber light. When it opened its mouth, Hyunwoo saw teeth longer than his hand. Claws scraped against the floor and left deep gouges in the reinforced metal. "This is a Vorash from the death world Krill," Professor Velnath said. "Krill rates as a Class 9 death world where nearly everything exists to kill everything else. The Vorash sits at the top of that nightmare food chain. This specimen has killed 4 handlers during its time in captivity. We maintain maximum security protocols at all times and no one enters the enclosure for any reason." The other students kept their distance from the observation windows, but Hyunwoo found himself moving closer. The Vorash paced back and forth along the far wall, following the same path over and over. Its 6 eyes scanned the space constantly, and its muscles stayed tensed as if ready to spring into action at any moment. Jisoo appeared beside Hyunwoo and whispered, "That thing is terrifying. How can you stand so close to the window?" Hyunwoo did not take his eyes off the creature. "Look at how it moves. That is not aggression. That is fear." "Fear? That monster is afraid of what exactly?" "Everything," Hyunwoo said quietly. "It does not understand where it is or why these walls trap it. Every sound makes it flinch. Every movement of the overhead lights makes it search for threats. This is not a killing machine. This is a terrified animal that kills because it thinks everything wants to kill it first. Timon joined them at the window. You might be right, but that does not make it any less dangerous. Terrified animals are often more deadly than confident ones. The Vorash suddenly stopped pacing and turned its 6 eyes directly toward the observation window. For a moment it seemed to stare straight at Hyunwoo. Then it released a sound that vibrated through the reinforced glass and made every student in the observation deck take a step backward. Every student except Hyunwoo, who remained perfectly still and met the creature's gaze without flinching. Professor Velnath's voice cut through the moment. That is enough observation for today. We will return tomorrow to begin formal study protocols. Please proceed to your assigned dormitories and review the materials I transmitted to your data tablets. The other students filed out quickly, clearly eager to leave the apex wing. Hyunwoo stayed at the window until Taemin grabbed his arm and pulled him away. As they walked back through the security tunnel, Hyunwoo looked over his shoulder one last time. The Vorash had returned to its pacing, but now it paused occasionally to look toward where the observation window was located. Something had changed in that moment of eye contact. Hyunwoo felt it even if he could not explain it yet. The Vorash had seen him and recognized something. Now he needed to understand what that something was before anyone got hurt. 3 weeks passed in a blur of lectures and observations and endless note-taking. The academy kept the human students busy from early morning until late evening. They studied predator feeding patterns and territorial behaviors and stress responses in captive specimens. Professor Velnath proved to be a demanding instructor who accepted nothing less than perfect attention to detail. The other students gradually warmed to the humans, though some remained skeptical about their capabilities. A student named Kel from a high-gravity world called them soft more than once until Taemin challenged him to an endurance contest. They ran laps around the surface platform for 6 hours straight. Kel had to stop after 90 minutes while Taemin kept going and barely seemed tired. After that, the mockery stopped. Jisoo made friends easily with her constant enthusiasm and genuine interest in every species she encountered. She collected stories and cultural details the way some people collected stamps. Within 2 weeks, she knew the names and homeworlds of every student in their cohort. She organized group study sessions and informal gatherings that helped break down the barriers between species. Hyunwoo remained somewhat apart from the social dynamics. He attended classes and participated when required, but spent most of his free time in the observation decks watching the various predators. Specifically watching the Vorash. He requested and received permission to access archived footage of the creature from the past 5 years of its captivity. He watched hundreds of hours of recordings on his data tablet late into each night. The patterns became clear after the first week of intensive study. The Vorash displayed distinct behavioral cycles that corresponded with handler shift changes and feeding schedules and maintenance activities. When handlers approached with weapons drawn and aggressive postures, the creature responded with violence. When the enclosure required cleaning or repairs, the Vorash attacked anything that entered its space. 4 people had died in separate incidents spread across 3 years. But Hyunwoo noticed something in the recordings that everyone else seemed to miss. In the moments before each attack, the Vorash showed clear signs of panic. Its pupils dilated beyond normal hunting focus. Its breathing became rapid and shallow. Its muscles trembled rather than coiling smoothly for a strike. These were not the behaviors of a confident predator. These were the behaviors of a cornered animal fighting for survival. He compiled his observations into a detailed report and submitted it to Professor Velnath. The next day, the professor called him to his office, which occupied a small chamber deep in the underwater section of the academy. The walls displayed slowly shifting patterns of light that mimicked sunlight, filtering through ocean water. Professor Velnath gestured for Hyunwoo to sit in one of the chairs clearly designed for species with different body structures. Hyunwoo perched on the edge awkwardly while the professor reviewed the report on a holographic display that floated in the air between them. Your observations are interesting, but fundamentally flawed, the professor said without looking up from the display. You're applying mammalian behavioral models to an alien species from a Class 9 death world. The Vorash does not experience fear or panic as you describe. It operates on pure predatory instinct refined by millions of years of evolution, on a world where hesitation means death. When it kills, it does so because killing is its nature. Hyunwoo chose his words carefully. With respect, Professor, I believe that is exactly the kind of thinking that led to those 4 deaths. Every species capable of surviving on a death world must possess sophisticated threat assessment capabilities. Random aggression would be as fatal as hesitation. The Vorash needs to distinguish between actual threats and non-threats, or it would waste energy on pointless conflicts. What we interpret as mindless violence might actually be a rational response to perceived danger. The professor finally looked up from the display and studied Hyunwoo with his large black eyes. You have been here less than a month, and you presume to understand this creature better than researchers who have studied it for years. That is either remarkable confidence or remarkable arrogance. It is neither, Hyunwoo said quietly. Humans evolved alongside apex predators. We learned to read their body language and understand their motivations because our survival depended on it. We competed with lions and bears and wolves for territory and food. We learned to hunt with them, and sometimes to hunt them, and sometimes to avoid them entirely. That experience is coded into how we think and how we observe. I do not claim to understand the Vorash completely, but I recognize the signs of a frightened animal because I have seen them in dozens of species on Earth, Professor. Velnath made a gesture that might have been dismissive or thoughtful. The translation software could not interpret nonverbal communication well. Your report demonstrates thorough observation skills even if your conclusions are questionable. I will grant you additional access to the Vorash observation archives, and you may continue your analysis. However, you will not share your theories with the other students. I do not want unfounded speculation interfering with their education. Hyunwoo thanked the professor and left the office. He knew he had not convinced Velnath of anything, but at least he had permission to continue his research. That was enough for now. That evening, Jisoo and Taemin confronted him in their shared common area in the surface dormitory. Jisoo sat down next to him on the long couch while Taemin stood with his arms crossed, looking concerned. You are spending too much time obsessing over that creature, Taemin said bluntly. You barely sleep, and you skip meals, and you stare at your tablet for hours watching the same footage over and over. This is not healthy. Jisoo put a hand on Hyunwoo's shoulder. We are worried about you. You barely talk to anyone anymore except to discuss the Vorash. Even in classes when we study other predators, you always find a way to bring the conversation back to that one creature. Hyunwoo set down his tablet and rubbed his eyes. He had not realized how tired he actually felt until they pointed it out. I cannot stop thinking about it. Everyone sees a monster, but I see an animal in pain. 4 people died because no one tried to understand what the Vorash actually needed. If we could just approach it differently, communicate differently, maybe it would respond differently. Or maybe it would kill whoever tried, Taemin said. You are not wrong about predator behavior, but you are also not accounting for the fact that this is an alien species from a world that makes Earth look like paradise. Whatever instincts you think you understand might not apply here. They apply, Hyunwoo insisted. Fear is universal. Pain is universal. The desire to survive is universal. Those things transcend species and planets and evolution. The Vorash kills because it is terrified and alone and trapped. If someone could show it that not everyone is a threat, maybe it would stop killing. Jisoo and Taemin exchanged worried glances. Finally, Jisoo spoke gently. Even if you are right, what can you do about it? You are a student here, not a handler, and certainly not someone authorized to interact with the most dangerous predator in the facility. The best you can do is document your observations, and maybe someday someone will listen. Hyunwoo knew she was right, but the knowledge sat heavy in his chest. He returned to his tablet and his endless analysis while his friends watched with concern they did not try to hide. The following week, Professor Velnath announced that their class would observe a feeding demonstration in the apex wing. They would watch handlers deliver food to several predators, including the Vorash. This would allow them to study hunting behaviors and feeding hierarchies and stress responses during high-stimulus events. The day of the demonstration arrived cold and gray. Storm clouds gathered over the ocean and turned the water nearly black. Wind howled across the surface platforms hard enough to make the transparent tunnels creak and flex. Jisoo joked nervously that the weather matched the ominous nature of their field trip. The class of 37 students gathered in the main observation theater of the apex wing. This circular room surrounded the Vorash enclosure on all sides with transparent walls that allowed viewing from every angle. Tiered seating rose up from the floor so everyone could see clearly. Professor Velnath stood at the front near the main control panel that operated the enclosure systems. Hyunwoo took a seat in the front row, as close to the transparent wall as possible. Taemin and Jisoo sat on either side of him. The other students filled in the remaining seats with the usual mixture of excitement and nervousness that came before any demonstration involving dangerous predators. The Vorash paced in its enclosure below, following the same repetitive path it always traveled. Its 6 amber eyes scanned constantly and its muscles stayed tense. Hyunwoo watched the creature and felt the familiar frustration building in his chest. Everyone else saw a monster. He saw a prisoner going slowly insane from captivity. Professor Velnath began his lecture about proper feeding protocols and safety measures. His voice droned on about force field redundancies and handler training and emergency response procedures. Hyunwoo tried to pay attention, but his eyes kept drifting to the Vorash. Something felt wrong today, though he could not identify what exactly bothered him.